Welcome to the HP Virtual Connect session. Thanks to the Atea for giving us this opportunity to present at this event. It is always good to talk to different new and existing customers. My name is Vercesuks. I do work for HP organization in the Baltic countries, and my responsibility is doing pre-sales. It means technical consultations for the customers and the partners regarding HP servers and storage product. First, how many of you have some kind of idea what HP Virtual Connect is? You guys do not count, you are from HP. Okay. How many of you have Virtual Connect? Oh yeah, there are also some. Okay. So this presentation is, I compiled in a way that those of you who do not have any idea what HP Virtual Connect is, my goal is that you leave the room with understanding what this product can do for you. And those who already know and maybe use the product will get a bit of latest news, what we have done to the Virtual Connect lately, so you will learn about some new features and new technologies we have put inside. So, to start with, why we do have something like HP Virtual Connect, and it mainly comes from the fact that the Virtual Connect is very tightly coupled with our Blade server offering. It's an integral part of our Blade system architecture, what we have. And the reason why we're having it, because we felt that the trends in the technology, the virtualization, and the cloud technologies, they, on one hand, were giving the very big promises to simplify, to make the infrastructure more efficient. On the other hand, it of course introduces some additional challenges. Like with the virtualization, you reduce the number of the physical servers that you run, but you have a lot of virtual machines that have different networking requirements, and you have to deal with that. So the complexity of something what industry calling server edge. So the first step from your server, is it virtual machine or is it your hypervisor host, to the network, becomes much more complex. So we needed, there should be something to address this complexity, and this actually was the purpose why we have developed something what we call Virtual Connect. And we think that this technology allows our customers to do two very important things. First is to simplify infrastructure in the terms how do you manage it, to make changes easy, to make sure that you do not have to do the manual work if something changes in your environment, to make sure that you have the flexibility at this server edge, at the point where your virtual machine connects to the network, without actually tinkering with the hardware. And second benefit is what we call simplify connections, or you can call it simplify infrastructure. We want to get the job done to provide your host the connectivity they need with using minimal number of physical components, which actually drives down the cost of your infrastructure, it drives down the cost of maintaining your infrastructure, and at the end of the day, something which costs less is always good in my book, probably in yours as well. And of course, there are many different new technologies which come around, especially together with the virtualization. We all need more bandwidth. We all need more connections. So we are talking about something like 10 gigabit Ethernet and the fiber channel over Ethernet. And I will also show you how the Virtual Connect plays with these technologies, and combining them with something what the Virtual Connect does can actually provide you additional benefits on top of migrating your infrastructure to support this new technology stuff. So, as I mentioned, we built the Virtual Connect idea right in our Blade system architecture. It was not something that we have decided later on, or that would be a nice thing to add and try to bolt it on the existing enclosure. When we have planned our C-class blade server infrastructure, we already knew that we have to have something like this. So it appeared initially in 2007. Now, you might think that this guy is telling me about something which is 6 years old in the technology, which changes once per quarter, we have something new. So that basically is not the case, because the Virtual Connect is the name of the products and technologies, but we constantly refresh them. We have already went through the multiple, both hardware iterations and also the firmware compatibility. So in essence, what the Virtual Connect is, it's a interconnect module that you put inside your enclosure with the special firmware which provides additional value services for your blade infrastructure. So we started initially with the idea of simplifying the change to actually making the product which virtualizes the connectivity settings of the servers. So each time you add a new blade to your enclosure, or you want to change the blade, the failed blade, to the new hardware, you do not have to go and reconfigure anything in your SAN and LAN connectivity. That was fine. That was, in fact, the fresh idea in the industry, which then later on picked up by some other players as well. But we felt that there is need to improve it, and the next big step was the additional capability, what we call FlexDen. Basically, as soon as it became cost efficient to put 10G connectivity directly into the default network connections of the blades, we utilize this capability to make sure that we can utilize this 10G throughput what you have to your blades efficiently, to make sure you also get the flexibility in defining multiple connections which are utilizing this same 10G port. Next step was Virtual Connect FlexFabric. So now what we have the 10G to the server, we can virtualize it. We have multiple logical connections going with the same port. Now we want to get the convergence of the infrastructure into the picture. If we have enough bandwidth, why should we have separate interfaces for SAN connectivity if we can use the same 10G that we already have? We just need a little bit updated hardware to make sure that we are capable to separating this LAN and SAN traffic at the point which makes sense in our infrastructure. So this was what FlexFabric done. And on top of that, well, if we are so good to making the converged connections to the server, a server with the two 10G ports can use LAN and SAN connections with no additional hardware, maybe we can simplify infrastructure outside of the enclosure. And the next step was HP FlatSAN. So if you happen also to run the HP 3-part disk arrays with our blades, you can connect them directly to the enclosure ports and skip the fiber channel infrastructure altogether. So that's how we are developing. We are making the hardware refreshes. We are updating the firmware functionality of the product to make sure that the customers who are using the technology are not left with some state of the functionality that they have bought the product with, but they can constantly add new features to their infrastructure. Because you can add any latest Virtual Connect module even to the very first C-class blade enclosure that we have started selling in 2006. And on top of the same hardware modules, we can get the newer firmware versions with new features. So this is what we want to do. We simplify the hardware configuration of the bladed environment by minimizing the number of the hardware components you need, but not sacrificing any functional stuff. So we still get all the connections, but doing it with the minimum number of network adapters and the connectivity modules required. So for those of you who do not know what the heck the C-class blade enclosure is and what this guy is talking about, I'll give you the short idea. So this is the blade enclosure, blade system, what we have, 10U box, which can have 16 blade servers. The blade servers can be 2 CPU, 4 CPU, Intel, AMD, very flexible stuff. Just to give you an idea. So where's the Virtual Connect stuff? Well, that's the back of the box. And this is actually the part that we want to get simplified. Yeah, we have the very rich interconnect capabilities built into the blade system. You can have up to 4 pairs of different switches. They can be LAN switches, they can be SAN switches, but this doesn't look that much of the cost saving. So that was one of the things that the customers were telling us. So that's great. Now I have this box. It's nice and small and integrated. It's more efficient on the power usage. But when I start to add the connections what I need, I end up with something like this. And if I have more enclosures, I just keep buying and buying switches and adapters. So this is actually what Virtual Connect does for us. This is what we move to when we use the Virtual Connect technology. All of this stuff which was in here can get replaced with just 2 Virtual Connect modules inside the enclosure, and you still keep all of your connections which are required. Of course, you can add multiple of them if your bandwidth requirements are really high, but the most customers are perfectly fine with something which is as few as 2 modules. So, how the hardware lineup looks at the moment. So we have 3 kind of series. You have Converged FlexFabric module. So this is the universal module which gives you 10G downlink to each of your blade inside the enclosure and can process both 10G Ethernet, fiber channel over Ethernet, and you can have the native fiber channel on 4 of the uplink ports. So going outside of the enclosure, you just split your SAN traffic, but you do not have to have any fiber channel dedicated adapters on the blades. It all go via the same 10G adapter. If you are interested into something more trendy and want to go, okay, I want to go fiber channel over Ethernet also behind the enclosure, we have the product Virtual Connect Flex 1010D, where you actually only have 10G uplink ports, and we support multi-hop fiber channel over Ethernet. So if you use some top-of-the-rack switch 10G with fiber channel over Ethernet support, we can bring fiber channel over Ethernet traffic one step further from the enclosure up to your top-of-the-rack switch. And if you want to stay very traditional and want to have your fiber channel separated, but still have the virtualization and management capabilities of the Virtual Connect server profiles, automatic configuration, we still have the traditional Virtual Connect fiber channel modules. So that won't give you that much of the cost saving on the hardware side, but there are some people that just want to keep it in a traditional way for longer. We do not left them high and dry without the product, so we still have the pure fiber channel module in the product line. But mainly all of the infrastructures we're building today using one of these 2. So, and remember I mentioned that initially the Virtual Connect was not about 10G and the Converged stuff. It was not yet around in year 2007, but what we already had right from the very beginning is the idea of the server profile. So this allows us to detach the connectivity configuration of your blade from your hardware. So we have the server profile which describes the way how this server connects to the network, what kind of VLANs it uses, what kind of MAC and VPN addresses it uses. This allows us to do very easily standard data center procedures like pre-configure your enclosure even when blades are still not there, move the workloads across different hardware modules just because the connectivity is virtualized and the external network does not know anything that it's different hardware, or replace the failed blade. Now, just last week, we announced a major refresh to the management tool, which significantly expands this idea of server profile and templates, and I will show you later on what it does for us at the moment. So, digging a little bit deeper about these separate technologies that I just briefly described. So what is this Flex 10 and how do we actually make multiple connections out of the same 2 10G ports on the blade? So this is the traditional way, which quite a lot of virtualization customers wanted us to do in the blade enclosure. They wanted to have 4 or 6 LAN interfaces and 2 fiber channel interfaces per blade. So we have to install additional cards. We have to put additional switches. Then first step was if we move the network connections to 10G. So instead of having 6 separate connections and 6 modules, we can move all our network connectivity just to 2 10G ports and 2 Virtual Connect modules. The fiber channel is still separate. And what the FlexFabric allows us to do, if we already have the 10G, and if we put not the standard network interface hardware here, but if we put converged network adapter, which can do fiber channel over Ethernet, we can also scrap the fiber channel part completely. So we went from having in a configuration for one enclosure for the 16 blades, 40 parts, adapters, switches, to just 2 parts. We use standard network ports on the blades. They are integrated. We just need 2 Virtual Connect modules. So the great reduction in hardware you have to manage and also on the spending. So how do we do these multiple connections? Then talking to the Virtual Connect module, each 10G port knows, okay, I'm in a Virtual Connect environment, and it splits itself, kind of, into the 4, what we call flex NICs. Operating system sees each flex NIC as a separate network port. So it's basically the same as you would have installed 8-port NIC card in your server. Just with the fact that you only have 2 real 10G ports which are virtualized into multiple connections. And in order to have converged connectivity, we can say, okay, one of these FlexNIC ports is actually your Flex hostbus adapter. It can run fiber channel over Ethernet or iSCSI. Fine. By doing that, we actually move from here to here, and it's all into the firmware, into the drivers and the logic of a product without any extra hardware. And this resonated very well with the virtualization customers, because this is what we quite often been asked to do. So give me 6 NICs and 2 hostbus adapters per blade, because I want to run my service console, my vMotion, and my standard virtual machine network on a separate interfaces. I want to manage them separately, configure them separately, etc., etc. But, well, if we can do it without extra hardware, that actually makes life easier for us. And we still provide enough bandwidth, because if that would be with 1G, 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 and the fiber channel, we still would end up with less bandwidth that 2 times 10G ports provide us. So by designing this Flex 10 solution, we actually, one of the key usage we had in mind is actually the virtualization infrastructures. So now, with the convergence, you have 3 ways to connect your blade enclosure to the LAN and SAN networks. One, which we split LAN and SAN traffic on the uplink ports of the modules. So on each of your Virtual Connect modules, you have a couple of uplink ports with the 10G interface modules which go to your 10G switches, and a couple of fiber channel transceivers which go to your SAN switches. Inside Enclosure, we do not need any extra adapters or switches. The second is if you want to utilize multi-hop fiber channel over Ethernet, if you have some top-of-the-rack switches with fiber channel over Ethernet capability, you just put the 10G uplink, which is capable of carrying also the fiber channel over Ethernet traffic, up to the first top-of-the-rack switch, and you split your LAN and SAN traffic there. And the third way is that you get your flat SAN connection to your 3-part disk arrays directly from the Virtual Connect module. So you can eliminate most of the ports in your SAN infrastructure. You only leave them for something like connecting your tape libraries or other backup devices, or for replication to another data center, but you can scrap all the ports that you have been using to connect the disk arrays. 3 different ways, and most of the customers find that one of these 3 is best suited for their infrastructure and provides the most savings in their case. So it's not like one size fits all. Here is the one way we can do it, scrap everything else, you have to redo everything. One of these 3 ways can be fitted into practically any existing environment. So single hop convergence. So this is the 10G link inside Enclosure, Virtual Connect FlexFabric module. Some uplinks go to your LAN, some uplinks go to your SAN switches, and you designate your virtualized connections to carry certain type of traffic that you require. Or the other way, dual hop fiber channel over Ethernet, that we still keep sending fiber channel over Ethernet traffic across the first hop after the enclosure going to some of your top of the rack switches, and you split the traffic there. And the flat SAN. So we can connect 3-part disk arrays directly to the fiber channel ports of the Virtual Connect FlexFabric module, which again gives additional cost savings, power savings, and makes the infrastructure simpler. Especially if you are building up the infrastructure which is targeted towards being the virtualized environment, that makes it specifically easier because all of the blades are running practically the same workload. So when I have this converged design inside the enclosure, this virtualized ports, of course the question arises, how do I manage the bandwidth? Because all my different networks have different requirements. My management network might need something like 200 megabytes per second, but my storage network might need something like 3-4 gigabytes per second. So we are perfectly aware that this is important, and this again is built into the product. So for each of these FlexNIC connections, you can specify minimum bandwidth, which is guaranteed to this connection. So like I want to have my FCOE storage connection always have minimum of 3 gigabits per second available. So you set the minimum setting. But then again, if this particular network has some bursty traffic, like especially for the storage, that might be the backup. During night, my backups run, and I probably need more than during the standard production hours. So I can specify the maximum setting. So actually, if the other NICs are silent, this connection can go and grab up to its max setting and get more bandwidth when it requires it. So this gives you quite good flexibility on defining how your virtualized connections from the blade use the bandwidth available, and to make sure that you can fit all your workloads and make sure your bursty traffic gets the throughput when it requires it. Well, but that is about the throughput. Besides the throughput, we might be interested for some applications in something which is called latency. It may be some real applications, real-time applications, voice over IP, or the same fiber channel over Ethernet, which we are not supposed to have running on high latencies. That's where we have the quality of service implementation. Of course, there's always the very simple way that we just pass through the quality of service marking from the external network, but that doesn't give you much benefit because the traffic is not prioritized when it's processed by the virtual connect. It's still sent on a first in, first out basis. That's why we added the full quality of service implementation, so you actually can map the external quality of service markings to the virtual connect priority queues for the ingress traffic, and you can do the same marking on egress traffic when something goes out of your virtual connect environment. So it's industry standard implementation which lets you prioritize traffic inside the Virtual Connect module. You can have up to 8 classes of traffic. Some of them are reserved as usual, so you have the real-time class, or with the fiber channel over Ethernet, you have also the lossless class for the fiber channel over Ethernet. Other classes, you can set the priorities based on your requirements, based on your applications. So the full featured quality of service implementation inside the Virtual Connect, also to help you to manage your traffic better and make sure your applications get the service level that what they require. Yeah. So that was about the managing server edge connections. Another thing what we have always kept in mind when designing the Virtual Connect products is the nature of the traffic in the modern infrastructures, especially in the virtualized infrastructures. Currently, most of the traffic is going server to server. We have the backup streams, we have the vMotion streams, we have the client-server applications talking to each other. This so-called east-west traffic, the traffic between the servers inside the enclosure or inside the multiple enclosures, corresponds to the higher part, then goes so-called north-south direction, which goes out of the enclosure to the outside of the network. So the Virtual Connect provides you the capability to have internal Virtual Connect domain networks, which are not, so the traffic between your different servers is not going out to the upstream switch. So we provide the minimum latency, and we also avoid the oversubscription of the uplink ports for the traffic which really has to go out of the environment. One of the ways to do it is utilize the stacking capabilities. So up to 4 pairs of modules can be connected into the stacks. This provides you both the capability to run all the traffic of this enclosure, server-to-server traffic, just on the stacking links, and also combine usage of the uplink links. So the same uplink set on one of the modules can be used for all of the servers inside the 4 enclosures. So that's also the clever way to design your networking infrastructure to make sure that your traffic patterns are actually matched with capabilities what the networking infrastructure can provide you. Management. So I've been talking about the features and the hardware. So how do we really say that? How do we really say that we are simplifying this stuff? How do we manage the Virtual Connect environment? This is how the Virtual Connect management infrastructure have looked until the Monday last week. So each module was running the web-based management. So you do not need to install any separate software. You just connect to the IP address of the Virtual Connect. And you do the standard configuration of your server profiles, your networks, your uplinks. If you want, or if you have to manage many enclosures, not 2 or 3, but maybe tens of those, you can have the external application enterprise manager, which talks to each enclosure separately and keeps the common database. It manages all the aspects of the networking, so the initial configuration, server profiles, and assignment. It gives you the alerting and the monitoring of the performance and the state capabilities, and the security parameters, user roles, logins, administrators, who is allowed to do what, etc., etc. And provides integration with third-party tools, because we are using it in connection with the virtualization and other operating systems, and we want to be sure that we can see this part of the infrastructure in our vCenter or Microsoft management tools. Yeah. Good thought out management infrastructure. The one thing that we weren't happy about it, that it was too hardware focused. And this is the interface, which looks very similar to all of the HP other tools. Quite easy to use, but still hardware centric and focused on this first step of the server edge connectivity. So, as I mentioned, last Monday we have replaced this stack with something called HP OneView. The HP OneView is completely new infrastructure management tool, what we have done, and it's not remake of the existing tools. We actually have wrote the new stuff from the ground up. So as long as I'm dealing with the HP infrastructure products, this is the biggest revamp of the management paradigm what we are using, what I have seen. And we have focused on the 3 very important areas. We wanted to have it simple, really, because hardware-focused tools, they're just too difficult. They'll give you very detailed view on what your infrastructure is, but there's, as with any information, there's a problem. The more information you have, the difficulty is to get what you need out of it. That's the same goes about the management tool. As soon as your alert table goes beyond 100 alerts, you practically do not look at it just because it's useless. You do not understand what's in there. We want it to be fast, so the people have to deploy new workloads fast. Always IT is under the pressure to make the new applications available faster. So we want to make sure that the management tools do not actually drag this process back. And we want to keep it very clean and simple and extensible. because now we see all these new virtualization platforms, cloud platforms like OpenStack, vCloud Director. And part of the hardware provisioning is it's a integral part of any your virtualization deployment. So we want to make sure that these tools are capable to talk to HP OneView and actually call on infrastructure deployment actions to be performed automatically. Another quite interesting thing, because when HP have started to work on these tools, we went to our biggest customers and we asked, so, well, what you do like about the tools, what you don't like about the tools, and in general, how your day-to-day tasks looks like. And what we find out that whatever you want to do regarding the infrastructure management has 5 basic tasks which are always repeated for practically any operation, but which are not part of the management at the moment. They are managed somehow externally in a spreadsheet, Visio diagrams, SharePoint files, all kind of procedures which are described, but they're just not part of the tool set for the management of the infrastructure. And this they're identified. So before do something, deploy something, or fix something, you have to decide what you will be doing, collect the information. So what is the hardware I'm deploying? What would be the configuration I have to deploy? Understand what are the dependencies. If I want to decommission one VLAN in my network, what are the components will be affected by it? Collaborate. Again, the organization might have in IT standards. They are usually maintained manually outside of the management tools. And 2 different people doing the same job might get different results just because they're doing the steps a bit differently. So that introduces the potential reason for the mistakes. And finally, again, communication. So what we thought that it's maybe a cool idea to have a Skype window open while you're chatting with the other guys doing a deployment job and have the management tool open, but why it cannot be the same? Why do you have to have this communication separately from the actual tool? So this is what we also try to address, going just a step above standard hardware management. So we simplified the dashboard view of the infrastructure. So no huge tables of different physical objects and the alerts list. Your single view of the whole infrastructure on one screen. If you see that there's a problem and have to dig down, fine, it's a couple of clicks away, but you have to understand from the single screen if everything is fine. Smart search. If you need to find any object, we have built in something like a Google search technology inside the OneView. You start typing in a search window the object what you want to find. Is it MAC address, name of the virtual machine, name of the host, name of the enclosure, and you immediately get the list of the objects, basically with the response of the milliseconds. It's really, really cool. Map view, so the logical connection about the objects in your infrastructure. You pick the one of them and you immediately see all of the other objects which depend on it. So if I'm going to reboot this hypervisor host, which virtual machine is going to be affected? If I have to do some changes to this uplink set, what VLANs are using this? Immediately you can see it just with the single click. All of the configuration is based on a template. So we are solving this problem of keeping the IT standards outside of the tool. So when the object is configured, the OneView saves this configuration as a template, which later on is applied automatically to all similar objects. And the multiple templates are connected to each other. So you have Enclosure template, and you have the Virtual Connect configuration template, which are connected. So if you're deploying the Enclosure, the Virtual Connect modules will be automatically configured based on the Virtual Connect templates. So all your best practices, IT standards are saved internally in the tool. You do not have to do it outside of the tool. And there's activity feed. This is your kind of Skype inside OneView. So whenever you're working on a project, you see what other guys are doing, what are the alerts coming, if somebody has deployed something new or if somebody has changed something. You get constant stream of the real-time actions which are happening in your infrastructure. We also wanted to make it very easy to start using OneView. So OneView is delivered as a virtual appliance. You boot it up in your virtual infrastructure, you give it the IP address of the enclosure, you are good to go. No installation, no operating system agents, no operating system administrator credentials. We only need to know about your hardware. We do not have to install anything other than just deploy the virtual appliance. And the maintenance is very simple. You just refresh the virtual appliance what you have. The template. So the template is attached to most of your infrastructure. We call it Converged infrastructure template, which describes all of the parameters which this object has to be configured to. So you're kind of using it to save your best practices, eliminate human errors, reduce time it takes to deploy something, just because based on the template we are doing it automatically. And also, if we want to have some consistent IT standards across the infrastructure, we make it part of the template. If I want to run all my ILO adapters in the blades with this firmware version, I just have to go to the template and say what this version is, and it will automatically propagate the firmware changes to all of the blades which are using this template. So it's very easy and very powerful. Just as an example, so you get your first enclosure. Well, the first time you still have to type in something. That's logical. We cannot guess what your administrator username is, what password you have to select for it. But along the way, as you configure the first one, we are automatically in the background saving it as a template. When you move to configure your first Virtual Connect module, we save it as a template and make sure it's connected to the Enclosure template. So later on, when you are at first, second, third, and so forth enclosures, all of these template configurations are immediately rolled out automatically without any manual task. And that's where the Virtual Connect part comes in. So all the configuration you do to your Virtual Connect. Uplinks, stacking, firmware version, enclosure templates, networks, flex NICs on the blade profiles, everything is part of the template and is deployed automatically. And if you want to change the configuration across all of your enclosures, you just change the template. So, I was mentioning initially that at the first implementation, the Virtual Connect server profile was about connections, NICs, MAC addresses, VLANs. With the OneView, we significantly expanded the content of the profile, so it now also has the BIOS settings, the firmware versions, the boot config. In the next version, we will be adding the storage configuration if you're using the FreePAR array, so we actually can automatically provision LANs for your new blades as a part of the server profile. Everything is saved as a single profile, so you basically get your software-defined server that you can move across your infrastructure without any connection to the hardware. It can be deployed on any blade, new blade, what you have automatically. And we are talking to the ILO in an agentless fashion, without any agents, to monitor and make sure this thing is healthy. So that's a very powerful combination which gives you both configuring and monitoring your environment, takes it to a totally new level of the ease of use and efficiency. And the plugins, as I mentioned, we cannot live in some kind of outside space without talking to any actual software that you will be using on top of the blades. So we have the plugins for the vCenter, which link your vCenter networking configuration to the Virtual Connect networking profiles. Or we can do the same for the Microsoft System Center, or if you're using HP networking in your outside network, HP Intelligent Management Center application can also get you the full management of the Virtual Connect in terms of the performance, configuration, and topology. Yeah, seems to be running forward pretty fast. So at this point, I might finally stop and ask you if there are any questions. Is it kind of, have I managed to give you an idea of what Virtual Connect can do for you? Yes? No? Please. Okay. There's a saying in Russian that the silence usually means yes. I'll take it as a yes. Thank you. And then can you get some more information? if you still want to get more details, but not too technical details, we have the Virtual Connect for Dummies book that you can download from the HP website, which will give you explanation of the stuff that I was talking about. So if somebody likes an IT reading before sleep, that might be the good book for a couple of nights at least. Not means that it's big enough, but just you read the couple of pages and then you fell asleep. And if you want to check what OneView is in more detail, as I mentioned, because it's delivered as a virtual appliance, we will have it as a trial download. Actually, not trial. We will have the download of the actual virtual appliance on the HP website, and this download includes 60-day trial license, so we can download it. And in case you have some test environment, try to use it. If you don't have test environment, then you can talk to us, because we have the simulators available that actually can be showed and demonstrated without the actual hardware. Or the third option might be we have quite extensive real use video files recorded. So these are also available on OneView page. Yes?
Can you say about real licensing?
It's licensed per physical server. So either it can also manage DLs, of course, because standard rack mount servers do not connect to the Virtual Connect, so you will have less of the objects in your profile, but it still can do health monitoring, deployment of the firmwares based on the templates of the BIOS settings. If you have blades, it's still kind of licensed for the physical server, but you have one license which attaches to the enclosure for all 16. And the reason for that is that the OneView manages the blade enclosure as a whole with all the management modules and the interconnects, so you cannot really say, I'm managing these two blades with OneView and those three with something else. So it just doesn't work if you have partially licensed enclosure. But generally, it's licensed per physical server. And if you're buying it for the brand new infrastructure, it includes ILO Advanced license. If you already have some infrastructure you want to manage with OneView, there's also upgrade from ILO Advanced available. And last but not least, so at our booth out there, there's this paper which is promo offer. And at the moment, this probably is the most cost-effective way to get into the Virtual Connect stuff. So we gave very good pricing to the Atea. So when you get, are we talking about these guys? When you get the 2 blades and the Virtual Connect modules, we give you enclosure for €1. So if you want to have the details on the configuration of the stuff which is inside, that just pick up the sheet at the booth and talk to Atea guys. They will be glad to write you an invoice. Well, that's why they're having this event at the end of the day, besides the party in the evening. The promo is running from beginning of the August, and we plan to have it until the end of January. So it's not like we just have the 5 of these sets available. Don't worry, if you make up your mind about it in 2 weeks' time or in 2 months' time, we will have the hardware available for you for sure for the same pricing. So I am very polite today, just on time. Any last-minute questions? If not, thanks a lot for the attention, and enjoy the rest of the event and the party, of course.